Hey, aloha scholars. Happy Sunday night. I'm assuming that Madison had at least a little bit of snow this weekend. We got hammered here in Lafayette. I think it ended up snowing close to 8 inches. Perks of living up north. I was pretty much snowed in yesterday, so that was kind of cool. Told myself I was going to get lots of stuff done, but I did not. I hope things are going well for you. I wanted to make a quick video about the endocrine system, and I'll post these slides this evening so that you'll be able to see them. But the endocrine system is a really cool body system. It's one of my favorites. There's very little anatomy to the endocrine system, most of it is physiology because the endocrine system is our signaling system. So, something you are all aware of as teenagers is hormones and how all those work, or at least that hormones exist. And we kind of think negatively about hormones, particularly around your age of puberty and post-pubescence. We think of hormones as being these horrible things that make us grumpy. There are actually so much more to hormones than that. There are lots of different types of hormones that all do different things. But basically, what happens is a hormone is, released. It binds to some sort of receptor, either inside the cell or outside of the cell, and then leads to some sort of change. Yes, some hormones affect your mood, but hormones also affect your metabolism, your digestion of food, your libido, your growth, all sorts of things. So your hormone works very close, or I'm sorry, your hormones work very closely with your nervous system, and it's pretty cool. So, like I said, the endocrine system is almost all physiology. And it does all sorts of interesting things. It's important for sexual reproduction, your growth, how you're able to maintain salts and water throughout your body, energy, and it does work closely with your immune system, at least a bit. Lots of different structures in your body with regard to your endocrine system. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, which makes you sleepy. The hypothalamus, which is up here at the bottom of the brain. The hypothalamus is a very important structure within the diencephalon. You learned a little bit about it with neurophysiology. But the hypothalamus, about the size of a single pea, is responsible largely for your entire endocrine system. And it's literally the size of a pea right here in your brain. It's kind of down in the brain in the middle in a structure called the diencephalon. So it is not located within the cerebral cortex. Nearby is the pituitary gland, which produces a whole bunch of different hormones. So the hypothalamus regulates the structures throughout the body. It doesn't really produce any hormones itself, but what the hypothalamus does then is regulate all of the other glands that produce hormones, including the pituitary gland. The thyroid gland is this neat little butterfly-shaped gland located here within your throat. You also have a parathyroid gland there as well. The thymus is the gland located just superior to the heart. The adrenal glands are probably my favorite gland. Look at how cool they are. They sit on top of the kidney like little hats. I think they're super fun. The pancreas is technically considered a gland because it releases two hormones, insulin and glucagon. And obviously, this is kind of a funny figure because someone would not have both ovaries and testes, or it is highly unlikely that they would have both ovaries and testes. They did that, I guess to, give you something to smile about. Let's see, here we go. So there are two types of hormones in your body. You have amino acid based hormones, which in general are water soluble. Now you need to think about the chemistry here, because if an amino acid based hormone is water soluble, that means it is not going to be able to get in the cell. Now that turns out to be really, really, really important. So amino acid based hormones, which are most of the hormones in your body, are water soluble. The fact that it is water soluble or is able to dissolve in water means that it is hydrophilic or water liking, water loving. Hydrophilic things do not play nicely with the plasma membrane. So if these hormones want to affect change, they have to affect change outside of the cell. The other type of hormones, now these are the hormones, steroid hormones are the ones that you're most familiar with, even though they're the fewest in number. These are going to be things like estrogen and testosterone. Now, estrogen and testosterone, and there are some other flavors of steroid hormones, these guys are lipid soluble. They're derived from cholesterol, and as you probably recall back to 101, cholesterol is located within the plasma membrane. It's actually embedded there. So, because these hormones are made from cholesterol, they look like cholesterol, they play very nicely with the plasma membrane and they're able to get into the cell. Now, this seems like a minor point. Why does the chemistry matter? And the chemistry matters because of how these hormones are able to affect change. Remember, going back to all those different things that hormones are responsible for, in order for hormones to do those things, those functions, they have to be able to interact with the cell in some way. So structure and function, or you're going to see really well how the relationship between structure and function plays out in the endocrine system. So hormones are circulating throughout your body all the time, and your cells don't need a hormone all the time. So when your cells are thirsty, so to speak, they express a receptor for that hormone. If your cell is not thirsty, then it does not express a receptor. Kind of a fun fact and a tangent a bit is that the endocrine system is actually really important with cancers, because often what happens is cells will overexpress receptors for cell growth and division. So these cells are constantly expressing receptors for those types of hormones, and kind of an emerging research topic is looking at those receptors from in cancer research. So it's pretty cool. Now, cell receptors are highly specific to a particular hormone. There are thousands of different types of hormones. There are thousands of different types of receptors. Think of it like a lock and a key. So what hormones do, probably the most important, well, really, probably the two most important things that they do. The first one is they can alter the permeability of the plasma membrane. So basically what this is going to do is cause or stop action potentials. Thinking about the things that action potentials do, which is pretty much everything, this is a really big deal. That's why I've made such a big deal about action potentials throughout the course. The other really important thing that they can do, depending on the type of hormone, is make proteins. And again, that doesn't necessarily seem like such a big deal, but again, think about all the things that proteins do. Proteins are enzymes, proteins are telling your cell what to do and when to do it. So protein synthesis is actually a really big deal. Over or under expression of hormones can have really important consequences. And that's one of the things that you're going to be looking at with your endocrine system project that you'll be developing. Hormones can also lead to mitosis, which is cell division, or apoptosis, which is cell death. So thinking about all the different things that hormones do, they're really important. And in order to understand why they're really important, we need to take a look at this relationship between structure and function. So, water-soluble hormones have to be able to affect change, but remember, they can't get in the cell. So what ends up happening with a water-soluble hormone is that it will bind to a receptor on the outside of the cell. And what will happen then is when the receptor when the hormone binds to the receptor, it will be able to do this thing called a signaling cascade. And it is pretty complicated. Lipid-soluble hormones, their structure is different. These guys are able to get inside of the cell. Now, it is noteworthy that these hormones still have to bind to a receptor. It's just this receptor is located on the inside of the cell. Now, what lipid-based hormones do is they directly activate genes. They turn things on or off. This is really important. So lipid hormones like estrogen and testosterone directly lead to protein synthesis. So this is why postmenopausal women who take estrogen substances or estrogen supplements are much more likely to develop breast and ovarian cancer than someone who does not take them. And the reason for that is because taking a hormone when you do not need one is going to increase cell division. Increasing cell division, you're significantly increasing the likelihood that something can go wrong. So lots of problems potentially with hormones. So again, in determining in determining how these hormones are able to affect their change, we need to think about the relationship between structure and function. So amino acid-based hormones use what's called a signaling cascade. Now, a lot of them are going to use what's called the cyclic AMP signaling pathway. I call it CAMP. It's super fun. So what happens is you have a hormone that binds to a receptor that is located within the plasma membrane. And again, it does this because the hormone is not able to enter the cell. Now that receptor is bound to a G protein, and these things are oftentimes called GPCRs or G protein coupled receptors. So when that hormone binds to the receptor, what ends up happening is this G protein gets activated because GDP will get phosphorylated into GTP. You've never heard of GTP before, or at least I'm guessing you have not. It stands for guanine triphosphate. And if you are thinking, well, why not ATP? Well, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Adenine and guanine are both nucleic acids. So GTP is basically just a different flavor of ATP. Think of it like a brand, so to speak. Basically, they do similar things. So GTP gets activated and it provides energy. So GDP gets phosphorylated, which activates the G protein. So the G protein is going to travel along the cell until it runs into an enzyme. In this case, that enzyme is called adenylate cyclase. What happens here is that ATP is going to get made into this structure called cyclic AMP. And what cyclic AMP is going to do is that it activates protein kinases. Protein kinases do this really dope thing called phosphorylation. Kind of think like Oprah here. You get a phosphate, you get a phosphate, you get a phosphate, you get a phosphate, you get a phosphate. And you're probably thinking, Brian, I don't care about phosphate. I get that. Phosphates are pretty cool, but yeah, it might not make you super happy. What does phosphorylation do? Well, phosphorylation is what turned this GDP into GTP. Phosphorylation turns ADP into ATP. And what are some different things that can happen when you phosphorylate or activate something? Well, you can activate enzymes, cell secretion, open ion channels, which leads to action potentials. The sky here is the limit. So phosphorylation turns out to be really important. Now again, you got to think about this process from the perspective of the hormone. The hormone has to be able to affect change, but it has to be able to affect change using the second messenger system because its chemistry does not allow it to go inside the cell. Now, CAMP is not the only type of signaling pathway. There are others. One of them is called the IP3 DAG pathway. The significance of this one is that it ends up releasing calcium instead of activating protein kinases. So what ends up here, well, it does activate a kinase, but it also releases calcium in that process. So what calcium does is it can bind to calmodulin. And if you think back to smooth muscle physiology, activating calmodulin is one of the ways of muscle movements. So that's kind of cool. Now, steroid hormones work differently because steroid hormones can enter the cell. So what happens with steroid hormones is that the steroid hormone goes into the cell, binds to a receptor. Now, that usually will go into the cell and bind directly to DNA. Um, and then it activates transcription or initiates transcription, and then it will be translated into a new protein. This turns out to be really important because this can lead to things like cell division, cell death, um, cell growth, all sorts of really important things. Steroid hormones tend to be very dangerous. Um, Now, in the right quantities, they're fine, but you've really got to be careful um, about hormones where they wouldn't normally be. So any type of hormone supplement, um, there may be very valid medical reasons for them, but you should always kind of be concerned. Um, Lots of different things can cause hormones to be released, such as how much hormone is around, whether or not the nervous system stimulates it, um, or other hormones which would activate them. The hypothalamus pretty much regulates everything with your endocrine system, telling your glands when to produce what hormones. Now, the effects at the cellular level are determined by how much hormone you have in your body, which would be the blood levels, and the number of receptors. So I said that when a cell wants a hormone, I kind of called it being thirsty. How many receptors there are is going to determine how thirsty it is. Now, these hormones are basically circulating throughout your body like a marble in a pinball machine, just trying to find a home. But the more receptors a cell has, the more likely it is that that hormone is going to be able to bind to it. Now, another factor here is the affinity of binding, which is basically how well the hormone binds to the receptor. Not all hormones have a great relationship with their receptors, but usually it's pretty good. So the rest of this PowerPoint just introduces you to the different types of hormones. I think that you'll find these to be helpful as you are working on your endocrine system brochures or websites, whatever you decide to make. Goiter is a really interesting disorder. We don't see it much here in the Western world, but it's really common in other places. We add iodine to salt. Which is the reason we do that is because your thyroid hormone requires iodine. If you do not have iodine, it can lead to an enlarged thyroid, which is what you're seeing in this lady's neck. Your thyroid gland is located right about here in your neck, and if you don't have enough iodine, it can lead to an enlarged thyroid. This is a pretty severe goiter, but it's a thing. And I think that's pretty much it. Last little bit here is just about the relationship between insulin and glucagon. Insulin is going to lower your blood sugar. Glucagon is going to raise it, and you can see that relationship here. And that's all I have for you in this very quick tutorial of the endocrine system. My goal here was not to cover the entire lecture, is just to give you an overview of the things that I thought you would find most complicated. So I hope you find these videos to be helpful. If you've asked me for a letter of recommendation, I am working on them. I think the number now is approaching 30. I will make sure that I have them done by Friday. Most of them are already written. I just need to upload them into the thing. So if you've asked me for a letter of recommendation and you've sent me the link, I'm on it. Just realize that lots of folks have asked me. And I'm working on getting your assignments graded. I hope to have everything you've submitted returned to you probably by Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. So take care. Have a great cub night.